typical suburban residence transformed into a nightmarish dwelling, with blood, chilling to the core, splattered across the walls. As a haunting final detail, a tiny child's handprint remained. This was the grisly sight that greeted Jennifer O'Brien when she entered her parents' home to retrieve her son, Nathan. The case was so macabre and disturbing that many found it difficult to accept it as reality. Nevertheless, it had indeed occurred, and the entire nation closely monitored the ensuing investigation. This narrative transports us to Parkhill, a neighborhood situated within the city of Calgary, Canada, renowned for its tranquil ambience and the endearing qualities of its local inhabitants. Parkhill boasts a scenic setting, featuring well-kept residences, streets adorned with trees, advanced infrastructure, parks, and a hospitable atmosphere. The area emanates an aura of serenity, rendering it a sought-after location for numerous families. These attributes captivated the Lickness family, drawing them to Parkhill. Alvin Lickness, a cherished grandfather and father at the age of 66, held a position of authority within both his family and his professional life. The gentleman was eagerly anticipating the chance to embark on a fresh chapter in his life following his retirement. His spouse, Kathy, aged 53, served not only as the family's cornerstone and a dedicated wife, but also as her daughter's closest confidant. Her nurturing disposition enabled her to fashion a warm and inviting space for all her cherished ones. Parkhill had been their residence for numerous years, and now the couple had decided to downsize slightly, purchasing a more compact home in Edmonton. Alvin and Kathy Lickness were on the cusp of savoring their retirement. They listed their property for sale, along with some of their furniture and interior items, as they commenced packing for the relocation. The impending challenges did not daunt them. After a hectic day, the weary but contented husband and wife found comfort in the laughter and playful antics of their grandchildren, as well as the encouragement of their friends. Their daughter, Jennifer O'Brien, visited her parents' abode for the final time with her sons, including the jovial 5-year-old Nathan. In a mere week, her parents were slated to depart from this place permanently. Jenny felt a tinge of sadness about this, as it was the place where she was raised and spent her childhood alongside her 4 siblings. Alvin and Kathy had acquired an apartment in Mazatlan, where they intended to spend the winter basking in the balmy Mexican sun before journeying to Edmonton, but they were not fated to relish their golden years. Merely a day later, the couple's genuine aspirations would transform into a chilling, desolate haze, enveloping everything in its vicinity. Nathan O'Brien was a lively youngster with a cherubic visage and perpetually tousled, sun-kissed hair. He was the middle sibling among Jennifer's 3 offspring. Owing to his affinity for superhero attire and his amiable disposition, this little boy was adored and recognized by everyone in his vicinity. He effortlessly forged friendships with both his peers and their parents, and was an indefatigable explorer of all things novel. Jennifer and the children had a delightful time at the family residence in Parkhill. As the day was drawing to a close and darkness was descending, Jenny resolved to stay overnight to avoid driving in the dark with 3 children. Nathan, who had been frolicking in the fresh air, drifted off to sleep instantaneously, while the youngest child, Max, couldn't settle down in the unfamiliar bed. At 11:15 in the evening, Jenny decided to take her 2 sons home, leaving Nathan to slumber next to his mother, intending to retrieve him in the morning. The crux of the matter was that Nathan had long yearned to stay overnight with his grandparents, and she didn't want to deprive him of such an opportunity. On June 30th, 2014, Jennifer arrived at her parents' abode in the morning to collect her son, but what she was about to witness was beyond comprehension. The front door of the house was wide open, and when the woman peered inside, she saw puddles of blood, and there was a heavy odor of death permeating the air. Blood was ubiquitous, on the beds, on the walls, on the floor. In the hallway, there was a crimson trail of someone's sneakers and bloody smeared stripes, as if someone had been dragged. The most heart-wrenching sight, imprinted on the wall, was the handprint of a small child's palm, as if the boy had leaned his hand against the wall to keep from falling. To Jenny's horror, there were no signs of her parents or her 5-year-old son in the house. She promptly called her husband and exclaimed that she thought her entire family had been slain and their bodies taken. Then, in hysterics, Jennifer dialed the emergency response number and repeated the message. The dispatcher instructed the woman to urgently get into her car and lock the doors, in case the potential perpetrators were still somewhere in the house or nearby. Jennifer sat behind the wheel of her own vehicle, gazing at the family home where she had experienced so many joyful moments, and the image of the wall with her son's handprint was seared into her mind. She couldn't fathom the reality of what was transpiring. The police swiftly arrived at the scene and burst into the house, which resembled a scene from a horror movie. They conducted a meticulous search of all the rooms but found no bodies. The grandparents and little Nathan had vanished without a trace. After an Amber Alert was declared, an extensive search commenced for the missing trio. The police hoped, until the last moment, that their kidnappers were holding them somewhere, despite the horrific scene inside the residence. Law enforcement collected DNA samples throughout the Ligness home, but among them, not a single DNA fragment or fingerprint of a potential perpetrator was found. During the collection of forensic evidence, investigators discovered a tooth in the estate, presumably belonging to Alvin, the homeowner. The blood found on 20-kilogram dumbbells lying in the garage also matched his genetic material. The lock on the side door had been broken, suggesting that whoever had brutally murdered the three people had entered the house this way under the cover of night. Officers also questioned about 200 people who attended the estate sale. Initially, many Calgary residents thought it was something akin to a custody battle, that the grandparents had taken the boy away for some reason and didn't want to return him to his parents. The public simply wasn't informed about the horrors that had transpired in the house. When hundreds of police officers, tirelessly searching for the missing family, found no trace of Nathan and the Ligness couple anywhere, they returned to square one, their family home, holding on to the faintest hope of finding at least the boy alive. Detectives hypothesized that perhaps the child had witnessed something that terrified him, and he had rushed to hide but couldn't get out on his own. In meticulous attempts, they searched all the closets, storage rooms, and looked under the beds, everywhere Nathan could have concealed himself. But he wasn't there. For a couple of weeks, the police still clung to the belief that the Ligness couple and Nathan were being held somewhere, and that the injuries they sustained in their own home might not be fatal. But as the days passed, hopes diminished. All this time, the trio was being searched for, but no bodies were discovered. It was becoming evident that this was not a kidnapping, but more akin to a massacre of 3 family members. The perpetrator remained at large. The police department held several press conferences where they finally informed the public that a violent attack had transpired at the Ligness home. All they had was a house with puddles of blood and too many unanswered questions. The boy's parents, not allowing themselves to think that their child might not be alive, addressed him directly from the TV screen. They reminded Nathan that he was a superhero and could handle anything, that they would find him very soon and bring him home. Jennifer, addressing her son, implored the boy to be strong and not be afraid, and people who heard her words had tears in their eyes because, unlike the mother, they had no such certainty that the child was alive. Everyone understood the misfortune of the grief-stricken parents, but didn't know how to help them. The Amber Alert did not yield any concrete results. Over 1,300 reports were received from various locations over the course of several days. People in nearby homes and businesses tried their best to help solve this horrific crime. They sent archives of video recordings from that night to the police. There were so many that it caused the police department's computer system to crash. Detectives analyzed hundreds of hours of surveillance footage, identifying suspicious patterns until, at one point, something barely perceptible caught their eye. On the night of Alvin, Kathy, and 5-year-old Nathan's disappearance, a vehicle was spotted circling the Park Hill area several times. In one video frame, a person was captured lurking near the Ligness residence in the pre-dawn June morning. Shortly thereafter, a pickup truck was seen moving north toward the town of Airdrie. In the bed of the truck lay an object covered with white material. law enforcement immediately distributed flyers with a photo of a late 1980s or early 1990s Ford F-150 pickup truck that had been seen on the street where the Lickness family lived on that fateful night. Detectives were searching for the vehicle and the driver who might have had information about the three missing persons, Nathan and his grandparents. Publishing this image proved to be a very astute move. A woman who recognized the truck contacted the police. Patty Garland was certain she had encountered this vehicle before. A strikingly similar truck was parked at her parents' house when she'd visited there the day before, accompanied by her common-law husband, Alan Lickness, whose parents and nephew were missing. The owner of this truck was Patty's brother, 56-year-old Douglas Garland. In his youth, Douglas was expelled from medical school for cheating after he had a mental breakdown. He was repeatedly arrested for carrying weapons and assault, but no charges were brought against him. Essentially, he got away with it all. Douglas had previously been convicted in 1992 when a drug lab was discovered on his farm. Facing arrest and to avoid imprisonment, Douglas fled to British Columbia and hid under the identity of Matthew Kemper Hartley, an Alberta teenager who had died in a car accident. Under this assumed name, he lived there for 7 years, worked in a lab, and when he was fired, he filed for unemployment benefits and calmly received money while hiding under a false name. In 2000, authorities arrested him and sentenced him to 6 months in prison for drug trafficking and identity theft. Psychologists attributed his crime to mental illness, essentially considering him a person incapable of violent actions. As a result, he was released after 6 months. In July 2014, police again detained Douglas Garland at a bus stop and placed him in jail, citing a previous charge of forging documents. He was very quiet and told the police nothing. An extensive search of Douglas's property was immediately authorized, given the concern that the Lickness and Nathan were alive but in danger. The police didn't even wait for a search warrant. It was a legal exception under emergency circumstances. The emergency response team launched a potential rescue operation. As part of a hostage rescue operation, they were to storm the 16-plus-hectare farm where Douglas lived with his elderly parents. It was the most serious lead. Concealing someone in a rural setting is easiest. However, neither the living nor the dead were found on the farm. The only thing that caught their attention was a barrel near the greenhouse. Something was smoldering in it. Inside the tank, there was nothing but ash, no blood, no physical evidence, and Douglas had to be released on bail under strict conditions prohibiting him from approaching the farm. At the same time, law enforcement obtained a warrant for a thorough search, and more than 300 officers combed every foot of the vast area, nearby fields and wetlands. While other specialists inspected the premises on the farm, detectives found books and a manual containing horrific graphic images deep in the basement. Upon further searching, they found boxes filled with handcuffs, some of which were small enough to hold a child's hands. Further findings included hacksaw blades, leather belts, bone saws, knives, guns, and a straitjacket. Authorities also stumbled upon a computer hard drive hidden under the basement rafters. This hard drive contained a lot of painstaking research on violence. Douglas had downloaded a plethora of instructions for himself from the internet, for example, how to attack his victims early in the morning to ensure the element of surprise, information on painful torture methods, and guides on how to take a person's life without experiencing emotions. Among the literature on the shelf were books on poisoning and violent crimes. There were also images of his alleged intimate fantasies and obsessions. Douglas had a real fetish for adult diapers, and there were several photos of men and women with their hands and feet tied, wearing these diapers, and possibly killed. There was also a set for impersonating a woman in the dungeon, a set of breast prostheses, 2 wigs with long blonde hair, hangers with women's clothing, as well as an extensive shoe collection of 89 pairs of various boots, shoes, and sneakers that fit Douglas. There was also an empty shoebox in the closet. The sole imprint could have been compared to the imprint in the Lickness house, but unfortunately the sneakers themselves were nowhere to be found. What law enforcement didn't find were the bodies. They literally searched the area on their knees, elbow to elbow, making their way through the tall grass all over the site. But it was all in vain. Meanwhile, without much thought, Douglas did violate the bail conditions he was supposed to follow, and returned to the farmhouse without the knowledge of the Calgary police. Detectives kept him under surveillance. They suspected that upon returning to his own basement, he would try to get rid of any evidence. His second arrest occurred as Douglas was making his way through dense thickets of trees and shrubs, with a police helicopter circling over his head. He was charged with the murders of Nathan O'Brien, Kathy, and Alvin. 2 weeks had passed since the disappearance of the people. Despite the absence of bodies found, Douglas was charged with a whole series of offenses, supported by a staggering amount of evidence, 1,400 pieces. Whether this man was actually the one who carried out the terrible attack in the middle of the night on Alvin and Kathy, not sparing even 5-year-old Nathan, was yet to be determined. The police, without halting, continued the investigation. They decided to examine the contents of the smoldering barrel they had noticed during the initial search of the farm. Sifting through the ashes from the barrel, forensic experts stumbled upon a shocking find. Among the hot coals, a baby tooth, charred flesh, a metal frame from glasses, and numerous fragments of human bones were discovered. A subsequent investigation revealed that there was a multi-layered and confusing history between Douglas Garland, Alvin, and Kathy Lickness that spanned several years. Patty Garland, Douglas's sister, who reported the truck to the police, was the common-law wife of Alan Lickness, one of Alvin and Kathy's sons. A key detail that caught the attention of investigators was that the two men had worked together several years earlier. When Alvin, a successful businessman, was looking for a partner to work with, his son Alan suggested Douglas as a potential candidate. This was back in 2006. Douglas, who had some education and practical skills, collaborated with Alvin in developing a pump for the oil and gas sector. It was Lickness's invention, and he hired Douglas to make various improvements to the pump. However, this project was never implemented, which led the businessman to decide to terminate Douglas's employment. The relationship between the two partners ended in early 2007, when Douglas simply stopped answering calls. Alvin patented the pump they had worked on with Douglas, but never received any money for it. So Douglas's grievance was literally built on an empty space. It can't be said that he was cheated out of millions of dollars. Having lost his job, Douglas became incredibly angry. The dismissal fueled a deep-rooted resentment that turned into bitterness that filled his mind for several years and apparently reached a climax, turning into a horrific massacre of his imaginary enemy's entire family. It is assumed that Douglas had no plans to hurt Nathan, but he was not going to leave any witnesses to his crime either. This soulless individual was not confused by age. He had a goal to avenge the insults inflicted on his pride. In January 2017, Douglas Garland stood trial in a crowded Calgary courtroom, where he entered a plea of not guilty to all 3 charges. Throughout the entire hearing, he did not file any motions. The sensational trial sent shockwaves through the entire nation, with the public following the case like no other criminal proceeding across the country. Just a day before their disappearance, Alvin and Kathy were hosting a garage sale, preparing to sell their property and downsize to a smaller home. They were scheduled to leave this house permanently a week later to begin enjoying their well-earned retirement. Douglas had little time remaining and decided to act swiftly. For years, Douglas had harbored a grudge against Alvin Lickness over a patent for a pump they had collaborated on. The fact that the device was never sold and ultimately did not generate a single cent did not concern Douglas. His resentment and anger had been festering for all these years, and on that day, June 30th, 2014, he finally decided to execute his plan and set his sinister scheme in motion. Early in the morning, Douglas broke into the Lickness residence by drilling the lock on the side door. Instructions on how to bypass such locks were also discovered on Douglas's computer hard drive. While the entire family was sleeping soundly, the intruder made his way to the master bedroom where Alvin was sleeping and struck him multiple times with something resembling a heavy club, then proceeded to the guest bedroom where, according to the DNA found, the grandmother and grandson were sleeping. Judging by the copious amount of blood, the woman also suffered a blow from a blunt object, but the exact nature of the weapon was not determined. The cause of Nathan's injury could also not be precisely ascertained, but bleeding had unquestionably occurred. Despite the substantial amount of blood in the couple's home, forensic experts were persuaded that all three were still alive when Douglas dragged them out of bed and shoved them into his truck. Most likely, he was transporting the bound bodies in the back of the pickup truck, concealed with a white cloth that was spotted on surveillance footage. The criminal left no DNA traces or fingerprints, as judging by his internet search history, he had previously studied detailed instructions on how to accomplish this. The man then headed with his three victims to the spacious house on his parents' farm, located over 20 miles away, where Nathan and his grandparents encountered the most unimaginable horrors. The DNA of all three were found on various torture devices, meat hooks, bone saws, and knives. Genetic material matching all three victims was also discovered on the outside of a pair of rubber boots near one of the outbuildings on Douglas's farm. Furthermore, a bloodied light switch inside the building matched the DNA profiles of both Lickness spouses. A forensic computer expert testified about the discovery of photos of Kathy and Alvin among the deleted files on a hard drive belonging to Douglas. The criminal had been monitoring the lives of his so-called enemies through social media. Douglas's own mother also testified in court against her son, describing him as a solitary individual who had absolutely no friends, but the elderly woman added that her son was an intelligent person who loved to read books and helped around the house. She said that Douglas had earned a Bachelor of Science degree in college and then transferred to the University of Alberta, although due to a nervous breakdown, he only studied there for a month. When the woman saw a television report about the disappearance of the three Lickness family members and informed Douglas of the news, he stated that he did not wish to discuss Alvin. Unfortunately, she did not hear her son leave anywhere that night when all three went missing, so she could not provide the court with anything specific. His own sister Patty made her son photograph her brother's pickup truck and sent the pictures to the police. It was her actions that led investigators to solve the case. However, the defense attorney, as anticipated, insisted that there was no specific evidence, neither forensic nor scientific, that would indicate that Douglas was in the Lickness home on the night of the attack. No one saw or could confirm that it was the defendant who took the lives of the boy and his grandparents. There was not even any information as to why these three met their demise. According to the defense, he should be completely acquitted. On February 6, 2017, towards the end of the trial, the prosecution presented one of the key pieces of evidence that they stumbled upon by sheer chance. The primary evidence in this case literally descended from the heavens. At 9:30 in the morning on July 1st, 2014, the day after the incident at the Lickness residence, a small plane belonging to an aerial photography company was flying over Airdrie airspace, mapping the city and two other small suburbs of Calgary. It was capturing images every 3 seconds, and by an almost incredible coincidence, it took 2 photographs that would later be presented as evidence in court and largely conclude the case against Douglas Garland. The photographs depicted 3 torsos lying face down on the ground near 3 sheds south of the main house. 2 of them were clearly adults, completely naked except for some white fabric wrapped around their waists. Most likely, considering Douglas's fetish, these were adult diapers. Experts were even able to determine the approximate height of these individuals. 2 bodies were 6'2" and 5'6" inches tall, and the third was much smaller. The small figure was lying on its side in the grass, curled up next to a burn barrel. Presumably, the remains of the adults were decapitated. The pilot of the aerial mapping plane testified that when he flew over the farm again 26 hours later, the bodies were no longer visible in the photographs. In this tragic case, the silence of the deceased echoes loudly. There were no bodies left, only tiny fragments. The sole confirmation of their existence on this planet was buried in the ashes left in the burn barrel. The bits of flesh and bone belonged to 5-year-old Nathan and his grandparents. It appears that after dismembering the bodies, the murderer decided to incinerate them, undertaking a grim process resembling cremation. While the horrific details of the monstrous crimes were being revealed in court, Douglas seemed unfazed and even made some notes to himself. He never exhibited any remorse for his actions. None of the victims' relatives were able to testify at the trial, but the written statement of Nathan's father, Rod O'Brien, resonated through the courtroom. In the letter, the man said that they did not have enough time to enjoy the company of their boy, and now they do not even have the opportunity to bury him properly, as there was practically nothing left of him. After several hours of traumatizing testimony and approximately 10 hours of deliberation, the jury reached their verdict for the defendant. The judge presiding over the case of the horrific triple murder in Calgary showed no mercy. He sentenced Douglas Garland, convicted of the deaths of Nathan O'Brien, his grandmother, and grandfather Alvin and Kathy Lickness, to the harshest possible sentence, 3 25-year terms without the chance of parole for 75 years. Theoretically, Douglas would have to be 129 years old before he could apply for a pardon. On the day Douglas was sentenced, he was assaulted by several inmates in prison and suffered serious injuries. After that, he was repeatedly subjected to abuse by other convicts for the killing of 3 innocent people, including a 5-year-old boy, over a senseless grudge that had occurred several years earlier. The heartbreaking events that unfolded in the Lickness and Nathan case had a profound impact on families and society as a whole. The void left by the loss of Alvin, Kathy, and young Nathan was immeasurable. The consequences of this tragedy resonated not only in the courtroom, but also in the hearts of those who knew and cherished this family. Words cannot describe the pain experienced by the parents of the deceased boy. Although they communicated with the press daily, they both refused to discuss any details of the horrific crime. Jennifer and Rod cope with difficulties day after day, raise their 2 sons, and try to adjust to life where their little superhero is absent. In the face of unimaginable grief, Nathan's parents, Rod and Jennifer, found a way to channel their pain into something positive. They established the Nathan O'Brien Children's Foundation, which is a beacon of hope and is recognized for transforming the lives of children in disadvantaged conditions. Their mission is to honor the memory of the deceased boy by providing other children with opportunities to live, hope, and fulfill their aspirations. Nathan loved sports, so the founders of the foundation annually organize sports events for children, teaching them to play hockey, imagining how the boy would have enjoyed participating in these competitions. Another thing Nathan loved was talking to his father before bed. Their last conversation will forever remain etched in Rod's memory. His son began to ask his dad what heaven was like, which was quite strange to hear from a 5-year-old child. But Nathan dreamed of being a superhero and soaring through the sky, cutting through the clouds with his hands. He told his father that he would meet them in heaven when they passed away. Rod even thought that his son somehow sensed that this would happen soon. Nathan's mother, Jenny, watches with tears in her eyes as her son's friends grow up, knowing that she will never see her boy as an adult. The Lickness and O'Brien case is a tragic chapter in Calgary's history, leaving an indelible mark on the hearts of not only the city's residents, but also the entire country and the whole world. May the story of the untimely passing of Alvin, Kathy, and little Nathan be a poignant reminder that we need to cherish our loved ones and strive for a world where kindness triumphs over cruelty, meanness, and anger. Brad Sickett was born on March 3, 1976 in the small town of Kingman in the state of Kansas in the United States. He was the only child of Janet Sickett, her husband, whose name and any details of his life remained strictly classified from a previous marriage. Janet had a son, Robert, Brett's older brother. The Sickett family had long been in law enforcement, so there was a strict and disciplined atmosphere in the home. Although little information survives about his childhood, it is known that he attended high school in Kingman. Brad was tall and sturdy, possessing the physical attributes to wrestle in high school, while realizing his desire for a perfect body through bodybuilding training. Soon, Brad's excellent physical condition led him to actively participate in inter-school tournaments, and several times he took first place, thus becoming a star wrestler and a prominent personality in the school. At the age of 16, while competing in a major wrestling competition at the Kansas City Coliseum, he met a girl named Vashi. Vashi Forest was born March 21, 1977, in the small town of Argonne in Sumner County. She was the third child in the marriage of Julie Hostower and Clinton Forrest. She was preceded in birth by an older brother, Rich, and a sister, Catherine, and later a younger sister, Tyler. Vashti had a noble spirit and was surrounded by the love of her siblings, especially Kathleen and Rich, who cared for her and protected her as their own daughter. Julie, on the other hand, was not a particularly affectionate mother. Moreover, she was often verbally abusive to her children. Thanks to her outgoing personality, Vashti had a large circle of friends. But although she received a lot of love from those around her, she did not feel that she was beautiful or intelligent enough. She was preoccupied with the approval of those around her, and of course, this made her feel less confident. However, that didn't stop Vashti from becoming a cheerleader for her school's wrestling team. She loved watching them win and never missed a wrestling match, such as the one where she ran into Brad. Vashti liked him so much that he immediately asked her out. Fascinated by his boldness, the girl said yes, and they both felt at ease at that first meeting and had been inseparable ever since. After graduation, the girl went to the University of Uachito, and the guy stayed true to the traditions of his family and joined the police academy. The logical changes of that period led to the young people being together less, which greatly affected Brett, who was already beginning to show signs of a controlling and irascible person. His growing jealousy eventually weighed too heavily on Vashti. Exhausted, the girl decided to end the relationship, but it wasn't a violent or traumatic breakup, and everyone went on with their lives. So after graduating from the police academy, Brad joined the sheriff's department in Sedgwick County, just 50 kilometers from Kingman. Despite the time that had passed and the accomplishments associated with professional practice, he was not satisfied, and nothing made him forget Vashti. He still loved her. Deep down, Brad never gave up his desire to return. So, as soon as the opportunity arose, he came to see her and told her that he had been attending church regularly all this time and that it was his faith that had made him a new man. Brett's words made the girl feel that he was sincere, perhaps because of faith, or perhaps out of genuine love. Vashti made the decision to return to him. Brett was so happy that he didn't want to wait any longer. He told her family of his good intentions and asked for her hand in marriage. The Forests were happy to hear the news. Julie and Clinton thought they were a wonderful couple and were sure their marriage would be a happy one. The marriage took place in 2004. Brett and Vashti then settled in a nice and quiet neighborhood in Kingman. There they made new friends, including Monty Welvin, a friendly neighbor who always invited them to barbecues in the garden of his house. It was the perfect environment for laying the foundations of their new home. But sometimes it seemed to Vashti that Brett's unpleasant side came and went. In fact, problems came up again and again because of his dominant nature. When Vashti became pregnant, however, the differences between them seemed to disappear. In the fall of 2006, their first son, Brandon, was born. 2 years later, the family had another son, Bronson. Recent parenthood made both of them realize the risks involved in Brett's job as a police officer, so they took responsibility for their children's future. If either of them were to be absent, they decided to choose a guardian for Brandon and Bronson. After carefully analyzing the situation, they chose Brett's brother, Robert, who was a trainer at the police facility at the time. Vashti devoted herself entirely to raising her children and doing housework. In her spare time, she wrote down her emotions in a diary. Although Brett was a loving and devoted father, sometimes his behavior was a little rough with the children, especially during playtime. He treated them like adults. Although Brett's violence was restrained, it seemed to be trying to break free. Until one day at work, he used excessive force to subdue an inmate by slamming his head against a concrete wall. The victim suffered a fractured skull and brain damage as a result, and the inmate died. A few days later, Brett was sued for excessive use of force, but as in many other cases of police excesses, his boss, Sheriff Gary Steve, gave him his full support, and the prosecutor's office and the Kansas Bureau of Investigation dismissed the complaint, and he was cleared of all charges. Brett was not remorseful, but instead admitted to his colleagues that he enjoyed violence, especially if it was intended to punish those he considered to be bad people. Later, Brett and another officer forcibly subdued a defendant who had lost control and resisted being removed from the courtroom for contempt of court. This episode drew praise, and for such meritorious behavior, the sheriff awarded both officers a bronze medal. Meanwhile, her love for her children didn't stop Vashti from wanting to develop her career. Recognizing the emptiness she felt inside, she set out to find a job and succeeded. Vashti became the new human resources manager at Vuachito's communications company. But Brett took it all ambivalently. The ideal situation for him was for his wife to be solely concerned with the house and Brendan and Bronson's education. It wasn't long before he started complaining about Vashti for spending an awful lot of time in the office doing work that he didn't even accept. From then on, the number of arguments increased a lot more. For the sake of the children's well-being, Vashti tried her best to fix the marriage, but she still felt that her efforts were in vain. Something inside her told her that this whole situation would end up in a bad way. With the idea of resolving the conflict, Vashti and Brett began seeing a clinical social worker, Connie Soderman. In the initial sessions, Vashti said she felt very lonely and isolated, and that couples therapy might be a last-ditch effort to keep their marriage afloat. However, when she suggested the possibility of divorce, the very idea angered Brett, leading to psychological harassment of the woman for weeks. He threatened to kill her if she dared to leave him. He also told her that he could dispose of her life however he wanted without fear of jail time because he was a cop and would make the crime look like suicide. Brett even talked about burning down the house to erase all the evidence. He was sure he could do it. In the days that followed, Brett met with Connie one-on-one and assured her, out of rage, that if Vashti continued the divorce theme, he would never let her see Brendan or Bronson again. He went further, vowing that he wouldn't hesitate to get them out of the country. In early 2011, Brett stopped patrolling the streets and instead became a self-defense instructor at the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center. For her part, Vashti was feeling much better than she had in recent years. She continued to attend therapy and began making healthy changes in her life by exercising and improving her diet. The decision to divorce became more of a certainty than an option. Sure, Vashti felt sadness, but above all relief. The plan allowed her to be optimistic about her future. To enhance the effects of physical activity, she added taking an appetite suppressant to her regimen, although she was well aware that side effects could include depression. Within a few months, Vashti's social life became very active. She expanded her contacts at work and met a man she was attracted to. The woman told her older sister, Kathleen, especially because she was afraid that Brett would find out. Fearing reprisal, Vashti spoke very frankly and openly with her coworkers, giving them details about various threats from her husband. Meanwhile, Brett learned that Vashti was keeping a personal diary without her knowledge. He picked it up and took it to his office to scan and print out a few pages, and then spent the day researching information about suicides, fire-related injuries, the differences between homicides and suicides, and their causes. In the first week of April 2011, Vashti attended a final individual session with Connie. Because she was worried about how Brett would react to receiving the divorce petition, they developed a protection plan for her and their children when the man received the papers. Brett arrived at his office on the morning of April 29th and to his surprise found an envelope containing divorce papers. After lunch, he found a projector in the pantry and used it to project the handwriting from Vashti's diary, traced it, and then wrote a goodbye note to his children. At the same time, Brett printed out documents on how to kill a person and pass it off as suicide. He then asked the maintenance staff how best to dispose of the computer hard drives and, after researching their recommendations, used a blowtorch to destroy them because they contained scanned images. After doing so, Brett threw the waste into a dumpster. He later drove to a convenience store and bought gasoline, which he loaded into his van. Several hours later, he begged Vashti to let him spend the night at home to say goodbye to his children. The man promised to leave the next morning. Although they discussed joint finances, Brett again begged Vashti to change her mind. And when he saw that the woman was determined to divorce, he soon renewed his threats. Tired of fruitless arguments, Vashti retired to her room to sleep, while he stayed on the couch downstairs. Around 3:15 a.m., he came upstairs to the bedroom with a gun in his hand and shot Vashti in the neck. A neighbor, who was awake and watching television, heard the shot but did not pay much attention. Brett, meanwhile, threw the gun next to Vashti's lifeless body and played out the whole scene, faking a suicide. He then doused the hallway and bedroom with gasoline, took the woman's cell phone and called himself. He then took Brendan and Bronson to a safe house. When everything was ready, the fire started. The flames engulfed the main room, and the fire caused the gun to start firing cartridges that were still in the chamber. Neighbors woke up startled at 3:45 a.m. They thought it was a shooting. At 3:57 a.m., 911 operators received a desperate call from Brett, who told them what had happened and said his wife had shot herself. When emergency responders arrived on the scene, the first floor of the house was burning, and Brett was outside in Vashti's car with his children. A police officer asked him if anyone was in the house, to which he replied that his wife was still there. Brett further stated that Vashti shot herself due to depression, but before doing so, she asked him to take the children to a safe place. He said he tried to save her, but smoke and fire prevented him from doing so. When firefighters were able to tackle the flames, they found Vashti's body in the master bedroom. There, on the bed just below the body, investigators found a .44 caliber revolver with the barrel pointed toward her feet and a 5-gallon container of gasoline lying in the middle of the bed. That morning, Brat called Kanai and told her what had happened. He was upset and even dared to express his guilt, saying that he himself had brought his wife to this tragedy. In the same way, the man maintained his alibi in front of his co-workers, to whom he said the same thing as he had told the investigators. 2 days later, officers found Vashti's diary in her car. On the last page was a handwritten letter and suicide note, which were taken as evidence for forensic examination. The forensic report said Vashti died instantly from a gunshot wound to the head. She also suffered gunshot wounds to her torso and thigh. Blood and lung tests came back negative for smoke inhalation, soot and carbon monoxide, which is normally present in the body of a person killed in a fire. Vashti was not present in the body. Burns on the body prevented the examiner from determining whether it was a homicide or suicide. Although Brett, in his many threats against Vashti, said he would commit the perfect crime by making it look like suicide and avoid punishment, things didn't go as well as he thought. Police soon noticed inconsistencies in Brett's story. For example, there were no signs of dirt, blood, or wounds on him. Another detail to note was the position of the gun, with the barrel pointing downward, which led them to question the alleged suicide. David Folletti, a special agent with the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, questioned how the weapon ended up under the body and confirmed that if Vashti had shot herself in a horizontal position, the weapon would have fallen to the floor, and if she had done it sitting up, it would have remained on the right side of the bed. Also, the trajectory of the bullet does not support the theory that Vashti shot herself behind her right ear. Some things didn't add up, so David decided to dig deeper. Upon further investigation, the officers found documents detailing how to kill a person and pass it off as a suicide. While analyzing the diary entry, they noticed a discrepancy in the handwriting, comparing the note to Vashti's other entries. Forensic scientist Dennis McFair concluded that the note was forged. Witnesses also reported seeing Brat destroying hard drives the day before. Testimony from a neighbor who heard the fatal gunshot showed that it occurred at 3:15 a.m., 45 minutes before Brat called 911, and that's when David Folletti's suspicions were confirmed. Police arrested Brat on May 13, 2011. He was charged with first-degree premeditated murder, as well as 2 other charges of endangering his sons. Brendan and Bronson were left in the care of Kathleen afterward. During questioning, Brat said that Vashti was not really the cheerful and balanced woman she wanted everyone to think she was. On the contrary, she lived in insecurity and depression because of her shaky marriage and because she took seriously the threats he made to her about taking the children away. Brat also added that after filing for divorce, Vashti felt depressed and remorseful, so she set a fire and shot herself. However, all efforts were fruitless because the police didn't believe him. On June 10, 2013, the trial took place. During opening statements, Deputy Attorney General Amy Haley presented the jury with her view of what happened and insisted that no one knows better than a police officer that fire destroys evidence. Asked about the projector, Brat said he only used the device to explain to cadets through a real-life exercise how to make a fake security card. The forensic document examiner testified about the forged letter and the burned hard drives. Regarding the latter, Brat claimed he did it to protect his personal information, not because he needed to hide anything. His attorney Roger Falk said that Vashti had suffered from bouts of depression since high school, and that the use of the diet drug had worsened her condition. Robert, Brett's brother, also appeared in court and supported his brother, confirming that he had seen Vashti depressed and sad in the past 2 weeks. In contrast, Kanai told the jury that although Vashti suffered from depression at the beginning of therapy, it was only due to the circumstances of her marriage and not a clinical mental health situation. She said that recently the woman had been feeling anxious about her future. The account of Rich, Vashti's brother, was the same, and his candid testimony recounted the emotional turmoil in the lives of his nephews, whose innocence had been shattered by Brett and who had been deprived of the opportunity to get to know their parents better. Prosecutors portrayed Brett as manipulative and claimed that he maliciously used his law enforcement experience to try to distort the facts. In response, the defense insisted on its version of the alleged suicide and pointed out that even an experienced medical examiner could not determine whose fault the victim's death was. Brat, meanwhile, told the jury about himself and portrayed himself as a loving husband and devoted father who was weighed down by his wife's desire to separate. He also accused Kingman County District Judge Larry Salamoto of seeking publicity. and then launched into a tirade accusing the judge of seeking a ruling against him to win a nomination to the Kansas Supreme Court. In the end, the jury found Brett guilty of premeditated murder. Judge Larry gave him a sentence of life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. He also added 6 years in prison on the other charges because the charges would be tried consecutively. Brett will be eligible for parole after more than 31 years. Judge Larry also took into consideration the fact that Brett did not plead guilty and lied to avoid responsibility, and did not express remorse. In 2015, Brett appealed his conviction and tried to have it overturned, but the Kansas Supreme Court denied the appeal and upheld the original conviction. Brendan and Bronson's uncertain future sparked a custody battle, first between the maternal and paternal families. Then Kathleen filed for custody on the grounds that she had already cared for them for 102 days. Since neither party could reach an agreement, the custody decision was left to the judge. However, it should be noted that there has been no news on the outcome of this custody battle so far. On March 20, 2020, in the city of Albufeira, Portugal, 20-year-old Diogo Goncalves went to meet a girl with whom he was in love. However, the guy had no idea how this romantic evening would end. The beautiful resort town of Albufeira, one of the most visited places in the Algarve region of southern Portugal. There, in 1999, Diogo Goncalves was born, the only child in a poor but hardworking family whose income depended mainly on the rise and fall of tourism. Diogo's parents considered him a good son. Those who knew him described him as decent, responsible, hardworking, and reliable. And at the same time, a very outgoing young man who loved being surrounded by friends and family. Diogo attended high school in his hometown. After graduating, he began studying computer science to pay for his studies and help with household expenses. In 2015, when he was just 16 years old, he got a job at McDonald's. The student was 17 years old and still working for the famous company when his life took an unexpected and tragic turn. One day, his father collapsed due to a stroke, which, according to media reports, left him in a vegetative state. That same year, while Diogo and his mother were still struggling to cope with his father's difficult situation, another setback befell the young man. His mother, a woman who had always supported him so that he could learn and grow, was hit by a car while on her way to work at the mall where she worked as a cleaner. The car dragged the woman a few meters and she fell into a ditch where she died from her severe injuries. Although the driver fled the scene, the police managed to identify him and he was brought to court. While Diogo waited for the conviction of the perpetrator of his mother's and father's deaths, he had to be transferred to a medical facility where he received the necessary care. His maternal aunt, concerned about his situation, suggested that he move in with her, but they had a serious disagreement and after a few weeks it became impossible for them to live together. Diogo told a friend what was happening and his parents offered him a room in their house in the Algos neighborhood, also located in Algarve. At the time, the proximity to the friend's relatives helped the affected student feel at home despite his young age. Diogo demonstrated a great ability to handle and overcome difficult situations through his patience and optimism. In 2017, already at the age of 18, Diogo graduated with a degree in computer technology and managed to complete a 6-month internship at Villa Vida Park, a leading 5-star tourist hotel. His work impressed the executives who offered him a position as a technician in 2018. Diogo decided to accept and quit his job at a fast food restaurant chain, where he worked for almost a year and reached the position of duty manager. The guy entered a new phase of his life, envisioning a future full of opportunities that would help him move forward after the hard times he had endured. After working at the company for a while and thinking about better times, he even decided to buy a car. Diogo got along very well with his coworkers, including a girl who particularly caught his eye. It was Maria Malvera, a 19-year-old girl who worked as a security guard at the hotel. Maria, too, came from a humble family, and like Diogo, she, too, had had to deal with difficult situations. Her mother had mental problems and her father had left the family when she was very young and she had never spoken to him again. The girl, who worked in the security service, became interested in martial arts and practiced karate. Maria wanted to become a police officer, but when she applied to the academy, she was rejected because of her tattoo. It was this disappointment that led her to enroll to study at Segar Info, a company that trains security guards in various areas of private security. Diogo liked Maria and made it clear to her from the beginning, but she did not reciprocate and treated him coldly. Fabio Acosta, a good friend of Diogo, claimed that the young man was head over heels in love with Maria. According to him, he was obsessed with her to such an extent that he turned down a lucrative job offer at the Sheraton hotel chain in Lisbon because he did not want to be separated from her. In addition, when the girl was on duty, he would bring her dinner or lunch. Over time, they became inseparable, and those around them took the young people for a couple. However, there was no romantic relationship between them. Maria told Diogo that she wanted nothing to do with him since she had just ended a toxic relationship with a naval officer, but at the same time she was giving him false hopes. Diogo never gave up hope for a future with her and looked for opportunities to be near her and please her in different ways. One day he was greatly disappointed when he came across a video on social media of Maria kissing another girl on the lips. Diogo was upset because he thought she should have told him that she didn't like guys and that this was the reason why they would never be together. Fabio, Diogo's best friend, tried to calm him down by saying that girls often do this, but he was not convinced and insisted that she had lied to him and that was the reason why she had refused. Despite the disappointment, Diogo and Maria remained friends, and she continued to accept his gifts and date invitations. Several times Diogo tried to walk her home, but she always told him that her roommate had a jealous boyfriend and she didn't want to let another man into her apartment. Time passed, and in December 2019, Diogo was told that he would finally receive compensation for his mother's death, which happened 3 years ago. After the payment, which amounted to 70,000 euros, the young man decided it was time to buy a house so that he wouldn't have to keep paying rent. Diogo shared the happy news with his friend Maria, who quit her job at the hotel a few weeks later. She stated that she could no longer tolerate her coworkers' remarks about the alleged relationship between her and Diogo. The girl also justified that she wanted to spend more time with her mother, who needed a lot of attention because of her mental illness. At the time, there was no reason to doubt her words. However, subsequent events suggest that her decision to quit the hotel was motivated by dark reasons. And that's where the third character in the story, 20-year-old Mariana Fonseca, comes in. She worked as a nurse at the hospital and had a stable relationship with Maria. The girls lived together in the home of Mariana's parents, as they were not yet financially stable enough to have their own home where they could enjoy their relationship. This was the position Maria found herself in when she learned of the large sum of money Diogo would receive. Curiously, from that moment on, the girl began to get closer to her boyfriend. Everything points to the fact that Maria shared information with Marian, and together they decided to deceive the young man to gain access to his bank account data and steal the money received as compensation. The thing is that one day, after repeated refusals by Diogo, Maria told the young man that she wanted to spend a romantic evening with him. This was a real gift for the 20-year-old guy who couldn't believe his ears after waiting for so long. The thought of being around the girl he was in love with made him ecstatic. The meeting was set for Friday evening, March 20th, 2020. Diogo was delighted and had no doubts about what had made the girl change her mind so suddenly, although Maria and Mariana had different versions of what had happened that day. Below I will give the facts, according to media reports based on official information. As soon as Diogo came in, Mariana offered him the orange juice she had brought herself, but the drink contained an unexpected ingredient: 3 ampoules of diazepam, a central nervous system drug with anxiolytic and sedative effects. It was Mariana who reportedly suggested the use of the substance, which she had stolen from the hospital where she worked. The girl's plan was to sedate Diogo, gain access to his banking information, and be able to manipulate his fingers to overcome the phone lock. Marian reportedly waited in a car outside the house while her friend carried out the plan. She even texted Maria several times to see if the drug had worked. As it took longer than she had anticipated, the situation inside the house became increasingly tense. Diogo didn't understand what was going on and began to get nervous. Maria then reportedly tried to calm him down by promising him an erotic dance, but first she had to tie him to a table. After being in that position for a few minutes, Diogo panicked and asked Maria to let him go. But she became aggressive and they began to fight using her martial arts expertise. She took control of Diogo, knocked him to the floor and wrapped her arms around his neck, preventing him from breathing. According to Marian's own account, Maria later told her to go inside the apartment, and when she did, she found Diogo on the floor. She asked Maria what had happened and lambasted her for going outside the plan, which was to steal his keys and take his money. Seeing that Diogo was unresponsive, the nurse applied resuscitative measures. But when he woke up, he was very agitated and tried to attack Marian. Perhaps, seeing the other girl, he realized that some conspiracy was organized against him and tried to defend himself, facing Diogo's reaction against his girlfriend. Maria took control of the young man by grabbing him from behind, dropping him to the floor and squeezing his neck again. Diogo's life was cut short at the hands of the girl he loved. His body was left lying in the living room of the house of Maria and Marian, who immediately proceeded with their planned robbery. They first cut off his thumb and index finger, intending to unlock his phone, log into a mobile payment app and transfer money. This took place over the course of several days, as there was a maximum daily rate for this type of transaction at the time. Committing the crime working from home was just about to begin, as restrictions due to the COVID-19 pandemic had just gone into effect. The young man was scheduled to go to work the next day. The girls tried to prevent his coworkers from noticing his absence, looking for him, and reporting him missing. One of Diogo's colleagues in it received a message from his number saying that he would not be able to go to work on set and needed a replacement. But the message had the same effect on the man as an unannounced absence would have had. Diogo didn't like changing shifts from one day to the next, so this request seemed very strange to him. Then he asked him if everything was all right, and received a yes in reply. The conversation with this hotel employee, and others close to Diogo, continued all Friday and part of Saturday, but the strange messages looked less and less like the person from whom they were supposedly coming. One of the recipients of these messages was Diogo's supervisor. One of them said that he would not be returning to work because he had met a woman from France and was going to move in with her. This story seemed strange to the boss, as Diogo was a very responsible person and was not going to quit his job so suddenly. Looking for an answer, he started calling the guy, but he didn't answer. Then he received another message saying that he was not in a condition to talk on the phone. Diogo's boss replied that he could only calm down if they could talk. He wanted to hear his voice and hear his explanation of what was happening to him. The reaction of the victims' loved ones to the messages that Maria and Mariana had sent to them pretending to be Diogo convinced the girls to change their strategy to justify the sudden disappearance of the boyfriend. Then they decided to make it look as if Diogo had decided to end his existence and plotted to dismember his remains and then dispose of them. Maria later said they acted inspired by the TV series Dexter about a forensic scientist who took the lives of criminals and fugitives from justice, erasing the traces of his own crimes by dismembering his victims. Having accomplished their heinous scheme, they stuffed Diogo's body in trash bags in the trunk of their own car, went to an ATM and shopping at the mall, where their hugging and laughing was captured by security cameras. They then traveled to their residence to begin cutting up their victim's body. Eventually, the girl placed Diogo's torso in a black bag and put the remaining parts in the container. While all this was going on at the home of Mariana's parents, Diogo's friends organized a campaign to report him missing and contacted the authorities, who waited the allotted 48 hours to declare him missing. Then the girls left the house. Maria got into Diogo's car and drove to the cliff near the Cabo de San Vicente lighthouse. Sagresci was followed by Mariana, who was in her car. At approximately 2 p.m. that same day, Mariana threw Diogo's torso off the cliff. She then left the victim's car abandoned nearby. They decided that in this way they could pretend that the young man had thrown himself of his own free will. Maria did not take into account that instead of falling into the sea, the remains were stuck on a rock. The girls left together in Marian's car. They drove 7 kilometers in about 12 minutes to the Inferno de Pigo waterfall in the town of Tavira, where they threw what was left of Diogo into the water. Shortly after, the young man's car was found in a parking lot near the Cabo de San Vicente lighthouse. According to the newspaper report, 2 laptops were found in the car. Forensic police were called to the scene and a land and sea search was conducted, as a result of which the torso of a young man was found partially covered by a black garbage bag. At the same time, at another point on the coast, namely at Inferno de Pigo, a French couple were shocked to find the lad's head. As for Diogo's hands and feet, they were found after an intensive search by police officers. The investigators who took up the case found the circumstances of the victim's death strange, especially since, judging from the information they had gathered about him, he was a quiet man who did not socialize with people of dubious reputation. The police continued to investigate and soon found out that Diogo received a large compensation for the death of his mother. By asking for money orders, investigators discovered that a substantial amount of money had been transferred from Diogo's account to Maria. Logically, the detective's next step was to find Maria to explain why the boyfriend's money ended up in her possession. The girl then tried to convince the police that she killed the young man because he was trying to abuse her. In fact, she claimed that this was the reason why she had left the hotel before the incident. However, a check of the text messages between the victim and Maria revealed that contrary to the girl's claims, this was not the case. She and Diogo became close after Maria stopped working at the first meeting with the officers. The girl claimed that she was solely responsible for planning and executing the actions that led to the fatal shooting. Maria emphasized that Marian had nothing to do with the crime. However, Marian's version of events contradicted her partner's assertions. The nurse explained that Maria told her that she wanted to steal the man's money but intended to take his life. She explained that she wanted to make him suffer to force him to hand over his bank account password. The evidence collected by investigators proved sufficient to convict the two girls. The detectives had at their disposal phone records, the dead man's cell phone, and ATM surveillance video. Maria and Marian were arrested on April 1, 2020 and appeared in court in June of that year. The judge closely followed the chronology of events recounted by Maria, who insisted on pleading guilty and denied any involvement of Marian. According to her version, Diogo's body had lain for 2 days in the suitcase of a car parked in the garage of the house, and it was there that his remains were dismembered. Taking advantage of the hours when Mariana's family was asleep, after listening to Mariana's detailed account of what happened, the judge asked several times where Mariana was at the time, as the body was dismembered with surgical precision at the joints. All eyes in the courtroom fell on the nurse. Mariana got ahead of all the questions and said that since everyone knew she worked at the hospital, they believed that she was the one who dismembered the corpse. She then explained that in order to get to the bottom of the matter, it was enough to use the internet. The judge imposed a custodial measure on both on the grounds that it was a serious crime within the legal system, committed in a cold, calculated, reckless, and absolutely brutal manner. A few months later, on February 24, 2021, the trial began. During her testimony at trial on February 26, 2021, Maria confirmed that she originally wanted revenge on Diogo for the alleged attempted violence, but did not intend to take his life. The defendant admitted that her intent was to humiliate the victim and confirmed that her friend had no relationship with the young man and that she was unaware of the alleged attempted violence. Maria also argued that her actions were not about compensation. The girls appeared in court together but did not look at each other throughout the trial. Rumor has it that after the arrest and subsequent jail time, they decided to end their relationship. The trial heard testimony from a number of witnesses, one of whom was forensic expert Teresa Costa. The expert explained that the amount of diazepam found in Diogo's blood was significantly less than expected from the 3 ampoules, which could indicate that Diogo had not taken the prescribed dose or had taken it many hours before his death. On April 27, 2021, the court handed down its decision. Maria was found guilty of the offenses of aggravated murder, accessory to desecration of a body, robbery, unlawful access, fraud, carjacking, and possession of an illegal weapon. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. She was also ordered to pay Diogo's father €265,000 in compensation. Marian was acquitted of the murder charge but found guilty of desecrating a corpse and complicity and fraud, for which she was sentenced to 4 years in prison. She was released, however, because none of the offenses for which she was convicted involved pretrial detention, at least until final sentencing. The court concluded that Marian's attempt to revive Diogo was a demonstration that she did not intend to kill him. In reaching his decision, the judge took into account a confession originally made by Mariana that she was fully responsible for what she had done. However, this decision was rejected by the Portuguese, who considered Mariana as guilty of the heinous crime against Diogo as Maria. After the verdict, Mariana left the court through the back door, where her father, who had been present at all the hearings, was waiting for her. Neither of them gave statements to reporters.